Only about 12% of WordPress freelancers and agency owners take home more than $100,000 a year. What are they doing that the vast majority of us aren't? I surveyed over 1,200 people to find out. Last week we wrapped up our 4th annual WordPress Professionals Survey, and this year we had over 1,200 responses. They answered all kinds of questions about their business, including things about their finances, the way their company is structured, where they're located, where their clients are located, their marketing activities, the different services they offer, whether or not they're using AI, and their outlook on the WordPress platform as a whole. If you want to see this year's results, along with all of our previous years, I'll make sure to have links to all of those down in the video description below. But in this video, I wanted to walk you through some of the data that stood out to me most. We can expose some deeper level insights by digging into the database, and we can even ask AI some questions about the data we have on file. And be sure to stick around to the end of this video. After all the controversy and lawsuits we had following WordCamp US last year, I think this is the clearest visibility we have into what WordPress professionals really think of the platform going forward. If this all sounds interesting to you, then stick around and let's get started. So let's just start here on the survey results page I put together. Now this includes all 1,233 participants, so all of this data is mixed together in these results. Later on, we're actually going to dig into the database where you can narrow this down to maybe agencies who are more like yours. If you do visit this page, I would encourage you to check out this quick little video. It's only about a minute long, but it'll show you how to sort and filter some of this information in Airtable. Now, like I said, we surveyed 1,233 people. The average team size was 3, and the average years in business is 12. The first question we asked was, do you run your agency full-time or as a side hustle? And like most years in the past, the vast majority of folks are running their agency full-time inside of our community. So about 77% are running it full-time, with about 23% running it part-time. Now that makes a ton of sense, as running a web agency is pretty easy to do in your spare time if you have another job or if you're just trying to bring a little bit of extra income for the family. Now a new question we asked this year are, where are most of your clients located? So the options were inside my community, inside my state or province, inside my country, or outside of my country. I kind of had a feeling that there would be more people that were actually servicing only clients inside their community, but that percentage only came to 13.4%, which I was kind of surprised about. Most people are operating within their own country, but they're not necessarily geographically locked into their own community. Later, we'll dig into these numbers, and the people who are only servicing clients within their community are definitely making less on average than those who have kind of expanded out, which is interesting. Now, this question about the overall trajectory of your business is something we've asked for 2 or 3 years in the past, and even though growing is still the highest percentage here at 57%, it's been consistently going down. If we go back to the 2023 results, we can see that it was at 65% then. If we go to the 2024 results, we can see that it was at 63, so it has slightly gone down. And then of course this year it made a pretty big jump down to 57. I don't know if that's a big enough decline to say, hey, maybe WordPress agencies are kind of on the decline at this point, but there's less growing today than there was a couple years ago, which is at least interesting to point out. Another question that we've asked a couple years in a row is whether or not you think you'll still be running your agency in 5 years. Now, 66% of people still do think they'll be running their agency in 5 years, but 8% are pretty sure they won't be, and 25%, a whole quarter of the population, is unsure whether or not they'll be running their agency in 5 years. Now, it'd be really interesting to talk to these people to find out exactly why that is. Now, this could be due to a whole host of things. It could be that they're getting close to retirement, or maybe they have another business that's taking off and they're spending less time on WordPress. But the pessimist in me worries that maybe people are unsure about WordPress as a platform, and they're unsure if they're still going to be involved with it within 5 years. If we go back to last year's results, we can see that the number one challenge people faced was work-life balance. 31.39 listed that as their biggest challenge. So this year I actually did this a little bit differently. Instead of asking everybody about their biggest challenges, since I knew work-life balance was a challenge, I asked people how many hours per week they work on average. We can see here that about 50% of people are working under 50 hours. Now here in the States at least, a typical work week is 40 hours. But we have 22% working 40 to 49 hours and 26% working 30 to 39 hours. Those are obviously the biggest bars in this graph and kind of where the majority of people are working. I know all of us would probably like to work less hours and make more money, but as we can see here, most people are putting in full-time hours in order to operate their agency. We can see just a few part-time people up here, 12 and 16% for going up to 30 hours. And we have a couple people here on the high end of the spectrum that are working over 70 or even over 80 hours. I know last year I was working something like 70 to 79 hours per week, and thankfully I've been able to bring that down. I'm probably in the 50 to 59 range now, which I feel pretty comfortable with as I really like the work I'm doing. Now, a new question we asked this year was whether or not people required a signed contract for their projects. It looks like the vast majority of people are either always requiring a project or that it depends on the project type. Again, it would be great to talk to these people and find out what that depends on. I know for some small projects, I don't require a contract for something that might only take a couple hours, but definitely for big full website builds, I'm always requiring a contract on that, as well as my care plans. One thing I found interesting in digging into this data a little bit further is that agencies in the US were much more likely to always require a contract than agencies outside the US, and I guess that just goes to how litigious everything is here in the United States. Next up, we have some data on what services all these agencies and freelancers are offering. Of course, we have things like website maintenance, website design, website development, and hosting kind of leading the pack here. It's interesting to see that even more people are offering website maintenance than just website design or just website development. Now, they're all up here pretty high, but it is interesting to see how important website maintenance is to WordPress agencies. Hosting was the least of these top four here, and I understand a lot of people don't want the responsibility of having to make sure that a website's up 24/7. Obviously, some of us like to sleep, and that makes some people a little bit nervous. Now, as we get into these yellow bars here, this was anything that fell in between like the 33% to 66% range. So we have things like strategy and consulting, search engine optimization. We can see that only about half of the agencies are offering any SEO. Less than half are offering e-commerce or copywriting, graphic design, performance optimization, discovery sessions, or even branding. Now, this discovery sessions one is pretty interesting, and we'll go back to that as we dig into some of this Airtable data, as we can see a difference in the total revenue, the average project price, and even the salary of those who offer discovery sessions versus those who don't, which is something I definitely advocate for quite a bit. And as we get down to these pink lines at the bottom, these are all the things that are under 33%. So not very many agencies are offering email marketing. Accessibility is another one I was kind of surprised to see this low. Under 25% of people are offering accessibility. Again, the data backs up that the agencies who are offering accessibility are actually making more in revenue. So that's an interesting one to think about as accessibility becomes more and more important. Paid ads, social media management, conversion rate optimization, and software development are all down kind of at the bottom. I think the software development one was kind of the odd man out here. I don't think there's a lot of people inside of our community offering software development, and obviously the numbers back that up. Although when you do look at all the revenue numbers, the people offering software development are making quite a bit of money. I think that's just because those projects tend to be quite a bit bigger. Next, let's take a look at the marketing activities people pursued in the last year. So the way I phrased this was just what marketing activities did you pursue in the last year? Now, this was a multiple choice question, so people could select as many of these as were applicable to them. So that's why you won't see these percentages adding up to 100. Now, a little over half of the people are doing any kind of in-person networking. I don't think I've done any of that in the past year or so. I tend to just stick in my office. Now, I was surprised to see that only 50% of agencies are asking for referrals. Obviously, referrals are a whole lot easier to close because those leads come in warm, so it's interesting to see that only half of the people are even asking for those referrals. Of course, you'll just get some referrals naturally, but asking for them can really bump up those numbers, so I'd encourage the 50% of people who aren't asking for referrals to start doing something to encourage those referrals coming in. 48% are doing online networking. Only 37% here doing search engine optimization is pretty interesting. Now, we don't know exactly what that includes for everyone. I imagine a lot of people are doing kind of the basic on-page things to optimize their website, but this is a self-assessed survey, and only about 37% of people feel like they're doing any kind of SEO for their agency. Only 33% are doing blogging or written content. About 40% are doing social media marketing, and then we get into these really low numbers. Email marketing or newsletters only comes in around about a quarter of the people surveyed. Only about 17% are doing cold outreach. 15% are doing public speaking, presentations, workshops, webinars. I did notice in the data that the people who are doing this seem to be making significantly more money, which is interesting. I think there's something about getting out there and being seen as an authority that can obviously help raise your prices. Now, paid advertising, so running Google ads or Facebook ads, that's only about 14% of the people we surveyed. Also, a pretty interesting statistic. I had somebody in one of my masterminds recently talking about what they're doing with paid advertising, and they're bringing in a huge amount of leads every month through paid ads in Google. So I know it's something that can work for people, but a lot of people don't seem to be doing it. Now, one that's very near and dear to my heart is YouTube or video content. Only about 10% of people doing this. And obviously the barrier of entry is a little bit higher. Not everybody likes being on camera. I actually hate rewatching my videos, so I'm right there with you. But I can tell you, after doing YouTube for several years, the vast majority of leads that come into my business come through YouTube. Now, I never promote any of my website design or development services on YouTube, but people see me teaching this content, and then they're more likely to want to ask me to help. Almost every project I've got in the last couple of years have been leads that found me through YouTube originally, so I can definitely tell you, even though it's a little bit harder to get started, there is a lot of rewards in doing video content online. And lastly, we have podcasting, which came in at just 5.8%. Now, a new one we asked this year was, do you publish any of your pricing publicly? About 41% say yes, they are publishing some of their pricing, and 59% are saying no, they don't. I tried to break this down to see how this affected any of the income, but those results were kind of inconclusive. Now, anytime you're doing custom work, it's hard to display your pricing. Personally, I've put some averages on my website, which has kind of helped weed out some of the tire kickers that might think a website is $500. But there's also productized services like care plans that are pretty easy to list your pricing on your website. Going through a lot of those websites, I did see that most people are publishing those care plan pricings, but whether or not they actually include it in these numbers, I'm not really sure. If we go down to our hourly rate here, we can see the average is $96.36, with the median being $95. Now, this has stayed pretty consistent over the years, although the first year we did the survey, this average was a little bit higher. I was worried that our averages were coming down, but I think it's just dependent on the number of people we surveyed. Now, this is another one of those where I'd encourage you to grab that Airtable base and filter this down to your country. The average hourly rate is quite a bit higher here in the United States than it is in some other countries that I checked out. So it's probably more applicable for you to look and see what the average hourly rate is for people in your area rather than this entire survey as a whole. Now, here we're looking at the total revenue for agencies in 2024. If we think back to that breakdown of how many people are full-time versus part-time, that was like 77% full-time. Seeing that almost 43% of people are bringing in a total revenue of under $50,000 does worry me a little bit. I would imagine after expenses and all that, their salary is pretty low, and we can see some of that salary information down below. If we look at some of the higher incoming earners here, once we get over 150 to 200,000, we can see those numbers drop down to single digits here, with only 2.2% having a total revenue of $1 million or more. Now, keep in mind, these are top line revenue numbers, not what somebody's paying themselves. Like I said, we do have some information on that coming up. In fact, that's next here. Now, this is one of the harder questions to survey here because a lot of people try to pay themselves less for tax purposes. So the way I asked this was, how much did you pay yourself in 2024? And I asked them to include their salaries, owner draw, dividends, benefits, etc. Basically, what I wanted to see is not what you're telling the government for tax purposes, how much you're bringing in, but how much is actually coming into you personally. So here you can see how that breaks down. If we look at just the agencies who are making under $100,000 a year, we can see we have 21% in here between $50,000 and $99,900. We have 30% in between $20,000 and $50,000, and 36% under $20,000 a year. That means the vast majority of agency owners are making less than $100,000. And if we go in here and we search for the average web developer salary, we can see that the average web developer salary in the United States is about $81,000 per year. So it would make sense that a lot of people kind of fall into that gap, but I was surprised to see that it was such a high percentage making less than $20,000 or even less than $50,000 a year. Here in the United States, you're probably going to need to be close to this number in order to make a living. So it's interesting to see that running an agency might not guarantee that kind of salary. Now, we did have 7.7% of people making between 100 and 150, 2.3 making between 150 and 200,000, and only 2.2% making over $200,000 a year. Now, how that revenue breaks down is also interesting. Obviously, the more recurring revenue we can get, the better. Anytime you can predict what kind of income you're going to have, that's helpful, and you're not out constantly chasing jobs. So one of the questions we asked here is, what is your monthly recurring revenue income? So 21% are under $500, 14% between $500 and $99. That jumps up to 19% here for between $1,000 and $2,500 essentially. And then the numbers start to kind of trickle down from there. We can see it does have a slight jump once we get up here to 20,000 plus. I'm guessing that these are the types of agencies that are running more of like a WAS, website as a service type agencies, where instead of having like a large deposit and final balance, they're breaking out the price of the website over 12 or 24 months. Obviously, when you do that, you're going to have some more recurring revenues. You can kind of predict that monthly income. Now, another one we've asked for several years in a row here is what your average project price is. We can see the most popular option here was between $2,500 and $5,000. So it seems like most people inside of our industry are pretty comfortable charging under $5,000 for a website, and that drops off as we get any higher than that. Now, again, I want to dive into the database with you so we can see what kind of services being offered affects this average website project price. It makes sense that if you offer things like SEO or accessibility that these numbers get higher, but how significantly higher do they get? That's where I think this is pretty interesting to look at. If you're looking for ways to increase your average project price, then offering some more services is a pretty logical way to do that. Now, it feels like we almost have to ask people which page builder they're using these days. Elementor started so far out ahead when we were back in our 2022 survey, and Bricks has been doing its best to catch up every year since then. And this year's the first year they actually came out on top. Now, it's only slightly higher than Elementor. Bricks was 24.4 and Elementor was 24.1, but between those two builders, that's taking up almost half of the market here. So we can see those two are well far out in the lead here, with some of the more popular block-based packages only getting around 10%. Now, as AI has kind of crept into everything in our lives, I wanted to ask people what their relationship with AI is. Are they embracing it? Are they dabbling with it? Or are they avoiding it? We can see the majority of people are embracing AI, so they are actively using it inside their agency. 37.4% are playing with it a little bit, but we have a 5.3% holdout here that are trying to actively avoid AI. I wonder how this number will change over the years as AI seems to get integrated more and more into everything. Now, looking at all these top line numbers is pretty interesting, but where I think this data is most useful and applicable is when you pop open the Airtable base and start sorting and filtering. The Airtable base and all the data collected from the survey is open to everyone, so you can pop open your own copy and do whatever you need. Now, what I thought I'd do in this video is show you how I go about sorting and filtering that information, because there are literally thousands of different combinations you could put together, way more than we could ever cover in a single video. So hopefully by following along here, you'll be able to see how to work with this data, and then you can go in there and start making some adjustments that are applicable to your agency. So back here at the top of our results page, there's a link here where you can click and open up a copy of this database. Now here you're going to have a copy that you can play with, but if you want to be able to save the changes you're making, I would encourage you to click this copy base button. When you do that, it will go ahead and put a copy of the survey into your own Airtable account. This works with the totally free Airtable account, so you don't have to spend any money to do this. But if you make a copy into your own account, that way you can save all the progress you're making and keep all these sorting and filtering options the way you want to. So we'll go ahead and close some of these things out, but this extensions dashboard is something we're definitely going to be using. Now, by default, you're just going to see all of the survey results here. So if we scroll down to the bottom, you can see there's a whole lot of data here. Now, these buttons up here are really what I want to point out. Now, when I'm looking at this data and trying to compare myself with what other agencies are doing, I want to filter some of this information out that's just not that applicable to my agency. So if we go in here and we click on filter, we can add a new condition. I work full-time, so I really only want to see the numbers from people who are full-time. So if we go in here, we can see this question of, do you run your agency full-time or as a side hustle? We'll have is as the if statement, and we'll change this to full-time. Now we can see those records went down to 934 total, so we have less records in here now because I've filtered out all the people who are part-time. I also might want to filter out people just inside my country. So again, we could go into these filters, add a condition. We can search for country. What country are you located in is, and we can search for United States. So filtering this down to things that are more applicable to your agency, I think is well worth it here. Now, one other thing I might want to compare with is just agencies of one, since there's only one in my agency. So we can go in here to how many people are on your team, including yourself, and we'll change that to 1. Now we get down to just 184 records. That's 184 people who are working full-time in the United States and working solo. So now if I pop open this extensions here and we click on the settings, we can go in here and start filtering some of this information out and seeing some pretty interesting graphs. So if we go in here to what is the average website project price, we can see how this graph compares to what we saw originally in all the results. So I'll scroll down here to average website project price, and we can see we had about 38% in this 2,500 range. Let's see how that compares to in here. And what's interesting here is we can actually see that this 5,000 to 10,000 bar is a lot higher when we're just looking at agencies that are full-time in the US with one person than they are when we're looking at everybody inside the survey. This 5,000 to 10,000 actually came in third place, with 2,500 to 5,000 being first, 1,000 to 2,500 being second, and then 5,000 to 10,000 here coming in third. But when we filter all this information down, this 5,000 to 10,000 actually comes in second. So that just goes to show you how filtering all this information can make all this data a little bit more applicable to you. We can close this chart out and we can actually create other views here as well. So I'm going to go ahead and right click this default view and click duplicate. Here I'm going to put no SEO. And I'm going to add another filter in here that says add condition. We'll search for services and we'll say has none of, and we'll search for search engine optimization. So that gets us down to 99 records in this view. I'll go ahead and duplicate this again and we'll say yes SEO. And we'll go back into that filter and we'll change this from has none to has any of search engine optimization. And that puts us at 85 records. So what's interesting about this is now we can compare that average website project price for people who offer SEO versus people who don't, or even their total revenue. So let's go ahead and open up the settings for this extension again. We want to change this view so we can compare these two. So the first thing I'll do is no SEO. And just to change it up, let's see how much people paid themselves in 2024. So this is what the graph looks like for people who don't do SEO. We can see the $20,000 to $50,000 range is the highest, less than 19 is second, and 50 to 100,000 comes in third. But if we change this to yes SEO, we can see that 50,000 to 100,000 actually jumps up to second place, with the less than 20,000 going down quite a bit. Now, some of this is correlation or causation, and you'll have to make a determination on your own, especially if you're making any kind of decisions based off this data. But I think it's pretty clear that if you're offering SEO, you're probably going to end up paying yourself a little bit more than if you don't. That definitely makes sense, but here the numbers actually bear that out. Now, like I said, we can sort and filter and group this information in 1,000 different combinations. So what's really going to be helpful here is for you to open up this Airtable base on your own and dig through the data in a way that makes sense for your agency. Now, one thing we can do this year that wasn't as easy before is put all that data into some kind of AI platform and then have it do some of the analyzation for us. If we go back in here into this Airtable base, we'll just go back to this original view that showed everything. And then this drop down here, we can download all this information as a CSV file. Now here I'm actually using T3 Chat, but I'm using the Claude model, and I was able to upload that CSV here to the AI model so it could analyze and access all this information. From there, you can just start asking questions to it. So I asked a few questions just to see how well it was doing and if the numbers were bearing out. I will say sometimes it gets a little funky on the math, so before you make any decisions on your agency, I would double check some of those numbers, but it's a good way to quickly go through this information and try to find some things that might be interesting. Earlier, I mentioned that thing about contracts and people in the United States being more likely to use them. We can see here that 58% of people in the United States always use contracts, but when we get down here to Germany, only 29% do. So those are pretty interesting numbers. Now, like I said, you're going to want to go and double check those numbers because AI does have a tendency to hallucinate, but it is interesting to get through all this information quickly, as AI can do this a whole lot faster than I can do it inside Airtable myself. I'll go ahead and show you a few things that I put in here that I thought were interesting. One thing I asked was which services offered correlate with the biggest bumps in total revenue. So I wanted to kind of compare that services offered with total revenue. We can see here that SEO had a 62% increase in higher average revenue. Paid ads had an 87%. Now this one's a little bit tricky because we're talking about top line revenue and people might be including the ad spend in this total revenue. So it's not necessarily to say they're making 87% more, but their revenue is 87% higher. We can see strategy and consulting has a 53% bump. But where I was really interested here is discovery sessions. We can see people who are offering discovery sessions have a 59% higher average revenue. I also asked it to break that down a little bit further here. So I wanted to compare people who offer paid discovery versus people who do not offer paid discovery. And I wanted to compare their total revenue, the average project price, and the owner compensation. So we can see here in total revenue, people that offer paid discovery have an average of $287,000, while people who don't have an average of $180,000. That's a $100,000 difference in total revenue, which is pretty interesting to see. But it's not just that top line revenue. We can see the average price for people who offer discovery is $87.50, while if they don't offer paid discovery, it's $53.20. And that even bears out in the owner compensation. The average salary for somebody who offers paid discovery is $78.50 a month, while the people who don't offer paid discovery, it's down to $49.20, which is a 59.6% increase. So things like this are pretty interesting if you're considering adding these types of services to your agency. Now, paid discovery was something I personally wanted to point out because I've seen a huge increase, probably something that correlates well with these numbers in my own agency once I started offering paid discovery as an option in my agency. By going through such a more involved process early on, most of those projects end up quoting a lot higher than if we don't go through that process beforehand. Now, just like we did inside the Airtable base, I had AI go in here and check the total revenue for people who offer SEO versus those who don't. There are all kinds of things you can put into these AI models and get some interesting results out of. And just like SEO, we see a significant bump here for people who are offering accessibility. Here we see a 68% increase for those who are offering accessibility versus those who aren't, and only about 24% of people at this point are offering accessibility. So what I see here is a gap in the market where not a whole lot of people are offering the service, and it obviously has a very high value. Accessibility is something that's becoming more and more important as the years go on, so I think there's a lot of opportunity here. For what it's worth, I ran this data through ChatGPT, through Claude, and through Google Gemini, and all of them were a little bit fuzzy on the numbers. Like I said, you're going to want to go back and double check those things before you make any decisions in your agency, but all of them do a pretty good job of finding some interesting data. Now, I teased at the beginning of the video, but I haven't shown any of the results for the WordPress question yet. After the drama that happened at WordCamp US last year, it kind of felt like WordPress was imploding. So I wanted to ask everybody what their outlook was on the WordPress project as a whole, and I was actually genuinely surprised by the results. So I tried to phrase this question as fairly as I could, and what I asked was, what is your outlook on the future of the WordPress project? And people had 5 options to choose from: very optimistic, cautiously optimistic, neutral, somewhat concerned, and very concerned. Now, if you were consuming all the social media posts and blog posts that were going through all of this drama, you probably, like me, figured that most people would say they're somewhat concerned or very concerned. But here we can see nearly half of the people we surveyed are cautiously optimistic. To me, this is a really encouraging sign that the drama is a little bit behind us and people are more focused on their own businesses and what they can do with WordPress than all the politics that go along with it. Now, right before this survey came out, we got the news that WordPress was going to change from 4 major releases a year to just 1, but people should have had that information by the time they filled out this survey. So it'll be interesting to see how this perception changes over the years as they're seeing less updates being done to WordPress. Of course, all of that could change in a matter of moments, so we'll just have to see where things go from here. Like I said before, the links to everything, including every bit of information we collected, are available on our website, and I'll make sure to include links down in the description below. I'd be really curious to hear your thoughts on all this, so make sure to leave a comment down below so we can have a discussion about what kind of information you found inside this data. We're obviously going to be having discussions inside our community as well, so if you're not part of that, I would encourage you to go to our website and sign up for our free community. If you enjoyed today's video, I would really appreciate a thumbs up, and if you want to make sure to catch the next one, hit subscribe, and we'll see you then.